back to the Unite Hate podcast, a forum to discuss and combat student hate. Today, we brought on Krista Kshatriya, a human rights attorney, lecturer at UCSD, and a parent of 2 kids in the younger school district. Krista offers a unique perspective on combating hate, having worked with people of all ages and backgrounds. We are going to be discussing hate of all kinds in all different places, including schools and the legal system. Informed by her vast experience, Krista will explain strategies for combating hate through outreach at a legal level and opportunities for students interested in taking action. Okay, so I did not do you justice with that very short introduction. So go ahead and talk about your work, both as a lawyer and as a lecturer.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for having me here. I'm happy to discuss. So more specifically, I'm an immigration attorney with a focus on refugee and asylum issues. And then I teach at UC San Diego in the School of Global Policy and Strategy. And previously, I had the extreme privilege to be a law clerk on the Ninth Circuit. And then I was a staff attorney for the court for a number of years and really had the most amazing opportunity to work with Judge Harry Pregerson on the court. And so after my clerkship, when I stayed on with the court, I developed expertise in immigration and asylum work. And now here in San Diego, I again am a lecturer, but I have a pretty active pro bono practice. I work with a number of organizations here in San Diego, assisting people to get immigration relief. And again, specifically, I work on asylum and immigration issues. So, and my immigration work is both here and across the border, and have done another other things. So I'm happy to be here and discuss topics. I should say, maybe unfortunately, hate is related to a lot of the immigration work that I do, especially in the refugee and asylum context. So.
Yeah, well, I'm so glad to have you here. All of the work that you do is so important. Could you talk a little more about the difference between your work on the Ninth Circuit versus what you're doing now with immigration, refugees, and of course your pro bono work?
Yeah, absolutely. So when I was on the Ninth Circuit, it was a really fantastic opportunity to get a glimpse into the inner workings of judges' minds and the process. When I worked there, my duty was to the court. And so I helped the judges actually make their decisions. So when I was in chambers with Judge Harry Pregerson, I was just one of a few staffers that helped him decide again, how to rule on the cases, prepared the drafts of the opinions that would then become precedent. And so for those viewers or listeners who are out there, the Ninth Circuit is a federal court that's one step below the Supreme Court. So it was really also an extreme opportunity to have a direct impact in a way on the understanding and the reasoning of the legal issues, and again, to be involved in precedent setting cases. But again, my role was as a staff attorney to assist the judges. And now my pro bono work that I do is to actually be an advocate for someone before the court. And so I'm oftentimes at the asylum office or in immigration court where I am, again, advocating and helping people tell their story about what happened to them in their home countries that makes it unable for them to return. And the majority of the work, as I mentioned, that I do is asylum and refugee issues. And so those are people who have fled their homes and their home countries because they have experienced persecution or face future persecution because of who they are. Because of their race or their religion or their nationality, their political opinion, or because they're some part of a persecuted group. And so I work with people who have, experienced some of the most extreme human rights abuses that you could imagine, again, because of who they are. And they are seeking safety and protection here in the United States. And so it's my job to, again, help them tell their story and to advocate why they qualify for protection here in the United States so that they're not sent back to harm.
Mhm. That is such noble work. And you mentioned how refugees come to the United States for protection. Do they also experience similar kinds of hate, persecution, discrimination that they did in their home countries, even in the United States?
So, I mean, that's a really good question. I would say that the system to seek protection, even is not necessarily a human rights friendly process in a
Hmm.
way. I mean, they have come here seeking safety, so it's certainly much better in their home country. But even the process itself sort of re-traumatizes people. I mean, they have to tell their story over and over and over again, and make sure it's consistent and believable. And the pressures related to all of that, and with the knowledge that they could be sent back at any time.
Hmm.
So it's certainly not it can be a very traumatic process as well. And then, as you mentioned, some they don't necessarily experience persecution like they've experienced in their home countries, but they don't always have welcoming arms in the United States, and many have experienced, again, either policies that have been discriminatory and have
Hmm.
impacted their legal chances, or again have entered communities where they have not always been welcome. But they come here because they cannot safely live in their home country, and they're looking for a place to rebuild their lives with safety and in dignity. And this really is a tremendous opportunity, for them to have that experience and those guaranteed human rights. I mean, I tell my students when I talk about this that you know um, refugee law sort of is the safety net that picks up when human rights abuses happen around the world, and it's the safety net, and it's really vital even for our international community that they have a safe place to go. And so they're coming here to the United States knowing they can't go back, and so
Hmm.
they want to become part of American society. They want to rebuild their lives here, because going back is not an option. Um, and so they are hopeful, and again, as difficult as the experience is, I mean, refugee law, I think, is ultimately a very hopeful experience, because they have already experienced some of the worst trauma we could ever imagine, and they're still survivors. They're here. They made it here. There's hope, and they're trying to get protection.
Definitely. It is so important. It's of utmost importance that refugees are able to be safe and protected once they flee the horrible things that they experience in their home countries. Once they get to the US, are there any laws that are protecting refugees from hate or further human rights abuses? I understand that there were acts like the Refugee Act of 1980, which increased the ceiling, increased access. So, that combined with other things, how are refugees protected once they get to the United States?
Yeah, I mean, a core part of even the 1951 Refugee Convention and 1967 Protocol that the United States are members of, as the international community, and and that we've implemented here, is that they should not face, discrimination, and that's really an important part of it. So, I mean, the same laws apply to them, anti-discrimination laws that apply to everyone here. Those acts that you mentioned are a lot about process and sort of guaranteed rights, and legal options and availability, and so those are sort of, how the how that these determinations can be made for them to be able to get protection, and people who are granted asylum and refugees who enter through the refugee admissions program that you mentioned, are able to become American citizens. And that's the beauty of the law, is that once they have been established that they're refugees and that they've been granted asylum, or again have come in as refugees, then they can apply for a green card. They can become United States citizens, and can become full members of our society.
That's great. It's really it's very hopeful to hear that refugees can be fully integrated into the United States, even when they weren't able to be safe in their home country. So with these laws that pertain to discrimination or in general that you mentioned, the ones that obviously refugees are also protected under, how effective are these laws in combating discrimination and hate based on kind of the stuff that you've seen? And how often are they like violated?
Yeah, I feel sadly that, any kind of numbers are going to be underreported
Mhm.
because, part of it is that someone has to recognize that, a hateful act that violates the laws happened to them, and then to kind of pursue any kind of actions in response to that. And,
Mhm.
I think for many reasons, people are afraid to do that, or don't do that, or don't know to do that, and to exercise those rights. And I say, those are when the rights have been violated, right? To make it to sort of pursue a punishment and a just outcome when hatred has occurred. Um, but again, these are there. Even though there's many reasons to feel very pessimistic, I think, about our court system, about the current state, even of the Supreme Court. I'm an eternal optimist, and I think, the courts are the keepers of justice, and they're supposed to be. That's what they're supposed to be, and that when someone has been wronged, they're able to seek, a remedy in court, and that's kind of the fundamental basis. And they are sort of supposed to be the protectors of justice. I remember somewhat recently the dean of my former law school, UC Berkeley, had sent out a note where he kind of reminded us that you are the in the profession of justice, and this is what you should be seeking. And so, again, a part of it is people need to know their legal rights, be educated on it, have access to attorneys to be able to sort of pursue those rights. And there's quite a very active, attorney population that do, civil rights and other issues. So, again, I think it's underreported, and it's always, again, if it's already happened, a lot of the other things in society are sort of our social bonds with each other and how we treat each other, and hope that it doesn't come to that. But there are provisions in the law that people can seek, or pursue justice in situations where they've been wronged.
Definitely. I agree with you. Despite maybe the not so good things happening at the Supreme Court level or in courts in general, ultimately there is hope for the justice system in the United States. And I love your outlook on that. But as always, the first step to getting to receiving justice is knowing that you've been wronged. And you talk about how these numbers are underreported, which is incredibly disheartening, right? Because these people don't understand that they were the victims of discrimination. What are the steps to recognizing hate? That one is a victim of it, that it's happening around you, and how can people be advocates for those who don't recognize that they're in a dangerous or discriminatory situation?
Absolutely. I think one important thing is it's kind of as basic as know your rights. I mean, we in the legal profession, and especially in the immigration context, actually do a lot of know your rights presentations for people because they don't know, again, what it is. And so when people have been wronged, there's, kind of an additional step to know that not only did something horrible happen to them, but that actually constitutes something legally wrong. That's kind of like a second step to that. And really, some people also, I mean, are already processing the initial trauma from the hatred as well. And so that's kind of both a difficult step to take, as well as, access to information. So I think one really big thing is sort of access to information about what rights people have, what constitutes a violation of the right, and then what remedies can somebody seek when a legal wrong has been done to them. And one thing is that there are hiring an attorney, accessing an attorney can be a barrier for many people.
Mhm.
But there is pretty active, I think, pro bono a pro bono community in these regards. There are community legal organizations and nonprofits that try to help people who have been wronged in these situations, seek retribution and justice.
Definitely. I love that there are so many avenues for people who are wrong to seek justice and that there are resources. What organizations exist to support refugees or anybody that was a victim of a hateful or discriminatory issue? And is there any way that students can participate?
Yeah, I mean, in San Diego, I work with a lot of really fantastic organizations. In terms of immigration, we can kind of start
Mhm.
with that. One of them that I work with is Jewish Family Services of San Diego. They also just have an incredible legal team there, and they have a vast majority of, I mean, sorry, a very, very big, um, so many different nonprofit programs to reach out to people. And another organization I work with is Casa Cornelia. They do direct legal services pro bono. And So again, because I work with immigrants, one direct way that is very helpful for many situations is if anyone speaks a second language, interpreters are always needed, and volunteers are kind of always needed at a lot of in these scenarios as well. Jewish Family Services, for example, runs the San Diego Rapid Response Network, which is a coalition of organizations to support, asylum seekers who have come through the port of entry, some who are in transit, some who need a place even just to stay and support. And sometimes they just have volunteers who are literally driving people to and from the airport or who are supporting, helping play with the kids at the migrant shelter. So there are small ways even just to kind of be a part of these issues. And then in terms of organizations that combat hate, and the ACLU is a great organization to always get involved in. Um, I'm trying to think of uh, and locally, none in San Diego, no specific other ones kind of come to mind. Oh, Legal Aid Society of San Diego. So there's kind of these like community on the ground nonprofits that are kind of there for a lot of different stuff. People might face discrimination and hate from their landlord and need access to advice on tenants' rights, or they may have experienced discrimination in their job. And so they need to counsel for that. So a place like Legal Aid Society, they do kind of a vast majority of experience of legal issues that are primarily targeted to doing pro bono work and giving people, again, people who normally don't have access to this kind of information, access, because information can be really empowering. And again, to know your legal rights, to be able to assert your legal rights can be a very empowering experience.
Definitely. And you mentioned so many, even when it seems like to the volunteers that it's small work, but so many important opportunities for people to work with the community. And I'm not sure if you mentioned the one that I'm going to bring up, but I recently learned that you worked with deploying UCSD community members to volunteer at safe haven sites, like near borders, stuff like that, I believe. So, who is eligible to do it, and what would that look like? What are some of the responsibilities of somebody who volunteers to do that?
Yeah, well, that one actually was a very specific program
Mhm.
targeted towards the specific need of the evacuations that were taking place from Afghanistan. So it's not ongoing. We're not currently doing that. But what happened there was someone from the International Rescue Committee, actually another one I should have mentioned. They're also fantastic, and they're an international and national organization, but had sort of reached out to us at UCSD. And because we were on the quarter system, seeing, we have people who are being evacuated from Afghanistan and are being transported and processed in at a number of U.S. military bases once they arrive. I mean, I went to one of them. I was volunteering there for a couple of weeks. I mean, it was similar to a refugee camp. I mean, it was very different. levels of infrastructure to support this at the different bases. But it was a processing center in a way, and housing them until they could help and assist them to get resettlement benefits and support into the communities in which they would then live. And so we organized, we asked people at the UC San Diego community who wanted to go to deploy. We even call it, they were deploying to the military bases to assist the IRC with their initial processing, because the IRC was contracted by the U.S. government to assist, again, with initial processing, helping fill out like the paperwork for work authorization, inputting into the system people's information, checking documents, things like that. So it was an incredible opportunity, I think, for UCSD community members to go there. They had to make a 2-week commitment to go, and we had a number of people go. And then I also personally deployed to one of those military bases to assist as well.
Yeah. All of that work is so important, and I'm really happy that you were able to engage the community. Were any of the people who participated any students of yours or people that you met while you were lecturing?
Yeah, a number of them were students. Actually, the vast majority of them were students, and we did have some faculty members and other staff members who went. But the vast majority were students. A lot, again, in the School of Global Policy and Strategy that I teach in, graduate students. And none of my previous students had gone, but I had a number of students who then took my class afterwards, having got introduced to sort of these issues and wanting to learn more about refugee and immigration issues.
Mhm. That's really important to have so many people there, and I'm glad that a lot of your students were there. Do you think that they felt more empowered to volunteer and to participate in this because of the things that they learned during your lectures and about refugees?
Yeah, I think it certainly, I think, gave people an understanding of what they were like facing legally when they were coming here. I mean, one thing was this evacuation happened so quickly, and the people who came in through the evacuation were given a temporary authorization to be here, because when they were evacuated, they didn't have like the majority of people didn't have pre-approved visas or pre-approved authorization to come to the United States. Thus, also the need for the military base to fully process them. But they didn't have a set pathway, or that they were going to be able to stay here. So, many people came unsure of whether or not they were going to be able to stay, if they were going to be deported back to Afghanistan, what was going to happen. And so to understand the fear that many people had, to understand that, so in reality, have been granted a 2-year temporary humanitarian parole with work authorization, and now many of, I mean, all of them, if they want to stay longer than that, have to apply um, through the available routes to stay longer. So many are seeking asylum. Some are eligible for special immigrant visas. Some are eligible for family petitions if they have U.S. citizen or lawful permanent resident relatives. And so I think just an understanding that people's legal needs were complex, that it really impacted kind of their mindset, their emotional state, and really, again, because we talk a lot about the human rights abuses people have suffered, or the reason that people have to leave is it's fear motivated flight. And so to understand that context is really important, and I hope people got that. And I did have a number of people say that it was a pretty life-changing experience to be able to go and participate in that, for even a short time. So that was pretty meaningful to see.
Definitely. That understanding is so important. I couldn't imagine fleeing a dangerous situation and then having like a 2-year countdown on how long I can be protected and safe and away from that dangerous situation. In general, do you think that understanding of issues that somebody maybe hasn't fully experienced or doesn't fully doesn't fully understand reduces hate and stigma around these issues?
I absolutely think so. And I think, especially in the way people perceive kind of what's going on at the border,
Mhm.
what part of what I do even is just sort of educate even my students through the classes about kind of what is happening at the border, and to understand that the vast majority of people are coming here wanting to seek asylum because they're fleeing danger and violence and persecution in their home countries. And to understand that experience, I think really changes people's perception. And there's so much you know, negative association with like immigration and the border crisis and people kind of sneaking over. And, even Donald Trump had called like asylum the greatest loophole in American or, in immigration, which is absolutely not true.
Mhm.
And so, the more people I think get educated about what is actually happening, why people are actually fleeing, I think really expands the way they treat them. And because it changes the viewpoint of this border crisis, something we should fear, to something we should address as a humanitarian emergency, which is really what it is and
Mhm.
that is going to definitely shape policy. It's going to shape the way people are treated. It's going to shape, again, their acceptance into the country as well, I think.
Mhm. Definitely. And you talk about this negative perception of the border, and I definitely agree. There's a large negative perception with people talking about, immigrants taking jobs or housing or resources, and it doesn't leave much room for empathy towards the refugees who
Yeah.
are fleeing a dangerous situation. Have you had any experience with maybe a student or a person who was either wary or negative about refugees, about the border crisis? And how did learning more about it change their minds or help them develop a new perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I think if people are, at least in San Diego and in the university, hesitant to come across with anything that could be perceived as, outwardly hateful, but it comes through sometimes in comments and stuff. And, one common thing I've heard, which is not an unreasonable comment, is like, oh, lots of bad things are happening in their home country. Why do we have to do something? Why do we have to have a drain on society or do something because of human rights? Or, it's their problem, not ours.
Yep.
Um, and so I think, going a lot of stuff like the education part again about understanding um, sort of how the refugee law system uh, functions, and understanding, I think also, again, yes, that would be the most ideal circumstance, is to make sure there are less human rights abusing dictatorships. I always tell my students that the number of refugees in the world is related to the number of human rights abusing situations. And so if we could solve that, we could solve the refugee problem.
Mhm.
But sort of in the absence of that, um, you have a real practical problem of that you need to solve, and that's, are you going to turn people away to face harm? Um, I I uh, I kind of start my first class also with a story about this cruise ship called the St. Louis. In May 1939, Hitler allowed about 930 passengers, mostly Jewish, flee Germany on this cruise ship, the St. Louis, and it was bound for Cuba. And Hitler sort of did this because he was certain Cuba and the rest of the world's democracies would refuse to admit them, and thereby sort of proving that the Nazis' anti-Jewish goals were shared by the rest of the world.
Mhm.
And while a few passengers were allowed to stay for various reasons in Cuba, Cuba refused to admit the rest, and the ship was ordered to leave. And the St. Louis headed north, sailing so close to the Florida coast that the passengers could see the lights of Miami. And the captain urgently telegraphed President Franklin D. Roosevelt asking for refuge, but the president never responded. And, in the end, the major the more than half of the passengers on the St. Louis died in the Holocaust. And so, I mean, I do this. Yes, we had to defeat Hitler, and we had to, Hitler had to go. But what do you do in the most practical situation when someone has come to you fleeing harm? Do you send them back to harm? And that's really what refugee law is what do we do in this situation where someone has come seeking protection, and the international and our domestic obligation is that if someone is determined to meet the legal definition of a refugee, you cannot send them back to harm. And we've said that as an international community that is not acceptable. And so kind of I think again, understanding um, how the laws operate, why they were set up the way that they did. And, we have this modern refugee law system because of the experience of the Holocaust. And I think that really puts it in perspective that kind of the world got together and said, no, we are going to provide protection to people who are targeted for being who they are. And yes, it would be ideal if we can, again, address the human rights abusing situations that are causing people to flee in the first place. But so again, sometimes engaging in or providing more information and talking to people reasonably and rationally, and I said, that's a real reasonable concern. I understand where you're coming from. Let's go deeper into that. And so I think even having that perspective and also not just accusing someone of being dumb or racist or, something like that is kind of off-putting. And
Yeah.
so, to really help people understand and then just hope that the rest takes care of itself from there.
Definitely. That story about the St. Louis is so powerful. Just that reframing of accepting refugees into our country is so, so important. And towards the end, you talked about respectful dialogue, encouraging people
Yeah.
to discuss their ideas, stuff like that, which I agree is so important. How can students engage in respectful dialogue, and what resources exist for students that would like to learn more about the refugee crisis and
Mhm.
like why the refugee crisis, why is the US accepting refugees, stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is a really good question. And I think it's really, really important if you want to create real change to do that, because it's very easy, even for people who feel they're being open-minded and not racist, to then be very accusatory to the other side and either write them off as, again, just being racist or bigoted, and either not engaging or, again, being so off-putting that it doesn't create real change. And so I think, respectful dialogue and really understanding, I think, why people think the way that they do. And then again, like educating a little bit more or engaging or in ways that get people to question it for themselves. Taking people down a road of self-discovery instead of telling what they should think or what they should do. Just providing new experiences, new education, new perspective, and understanding their perspective to kind of really is a much more impactful way, I think, to change minds that then lead to changing actions. Um, and so, how to educate about this one specifically, there are lots of, I would say the news media is a really good place in very credible sources. Kate Morrissey, who writes for the San Diego Union Tribune, she is a fantastic reporter about really showing what's happening on the ground here at the border. She has some fantastic pieces that explain, for a general audience, how the asylum system works. What are the disparities in outcomes, in the asylum system? And another piece that's really amazing about like what's happened to people that have been returned, you know. and the dangers that they face, because we have sent people back to face these harms. So understanding that, and I think that it's very eye-opening. So on that's one level. And then there's also some really great organizations. The American Immigration Council puts forth really uh, uh, like good kind of policy memo type stuff on really complex legal issues. They incorporate a lot of data. At UC San Diego, there's the UC San Diego Immigration what is it? Policy Institute. I think I'm butchering the name, but it's run by Tom Wong, Professor Tom Wong. They have a lot of great research coming out of them. Again, the ACLU has great stuff. Human Rights First is another organization that has a lot of great information. And then there's also organizations that do very specific stuff that people might be interested in. Tahirih Justice Center and the Center for Gender and Refugee Studies at UC Hastings focus on people fleeing gender-based violence in their home countries. And they also have some really good explainers and current information on the issues.
Wow, all of these resources are so great and they sound incredibly comprehensive. And especially Kate Morrissey, the one that you talked
Mhm.
about, giving a perspective on what happens to refugees that are returned back to their home country. That's something that honestly I didn't even think about, and that could be really powerful to read about. All of these are perfect resources for, I want to like older kids, high school, college,
Hmm.
even. Um, what resources exist for younger kids or even parents of younger kids that are looking to teach their kids to be more open-minded, things specifically about the refugee crisis, things not specifically about the
Mhm.
refugee crisis, just any of that?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a good question and one I've thought about a lot,
Mhm.
especially during COVID and educating my own children.
Yeah.
I did some homeschooling when the schools were not fully open. I used a history curriculum called Curiosity Chronicles that I felt was really good I mean, it goes all the way back to ancient times, and within even the ancient book, it includes stuff on the ancient communities, indigenous communities in the Americas, in Africa, and things that you wouldn't normally find sort of in the traditional textbooks that are used in school. I thought that they gave some good perspectives. And I think just a real multicultural curriculum. There's lots of, just uh, great kids books, I think, even that help with this. I think, and so understanding, I think, different cultures, different perspectives on it, even if it's as basic as like a kid's book on Diwali or like Ramadan or something like that, or seeing images of children in books with wearing hijab or of different colors and different skin colors and ethnicities and stuff, I think is really powerful message for children to see the diversity that may not exist or does exist in their own communities.
Definitely. All of that representation, even in children's books at such a young age, is so, so important. And as a parent and teacher from home during the COVID pandemic, would you
Yeah.
say that younger kids are more open to learning about like new things or things that they're unfamiliar with, and why or why not?
Absolutely. And I think that's where, the education system and us as parents have a real critical role because we're sort of introducing them to this. And I'm one of the firm believers that, kids are not, born with kind of biases or disparities, but and or negative viewpoints of others. And it's built or can come in real subtle ways
Mhm.
without even just, again, like if you only see the same type of people around you, and it's not anything like a parent is trying deliberately to, they're
Yeah.
not saying hateful things about others, but to again not be exposed to other cultures or not understand it, it is really really important. And I think, kids, they want to learn about this stuff. They want to engage at a young age. I remember
Mhm.
volunteering in my daughter's kindergarten classroom, and they were learning to make letter T's. And one of the little girls said, "Oh, it's like making the cross." Well, turns out at the table there was also a girl who was Jewish,
Mhm.
two kids who are Indian and Hindu culture, and they were like, and again this girl who brought up Christianity, and it's just coming up and making teas. They're like doing their little basic rotations, and they're engaging already in curious discussions about God and about differences in religion,
Mhm.
and trying to understand that and piece that together. So I think they want to learn, they want to be exposed, and so just really at a young age, seeing lots of different cultures, understanding that lots of different cultures are acceptable, and the exposure is really important.
Definitely. That exposure is so important. And would you say that that exposure, that early understanding and curiosity and fascination with things that are different, different cultures and experiences lead to like less hate at an older age, like when these kids are in high school or college?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what kind of research in a more formal way is out there, but from my own experience, I do think that's really important, because the hatred is born out of seeing difference, and difference exists, but seeing different as bad. And so, if you can recognize difference in a very positive way, in a way that's celebrated, then I think you do help kids again, when they're faced again with the same differences they saw, or new experiences of diversity and difference. They're very much more accepting, and may even seek it out, as
Mhm.
something that's familiar and happy and positive experience for them.
Definitely. And earlier, I loved your anecdote about volunteering in your daughter's kindergarten classroom and just seeing this kind of spontaneous peer-to-peer discussion about different
Hmm.
religions, stuff like that. What's the best way for young kids to learn about different backgrounds? Is it through like this kind of peer-to-peer discussion? Is it through maybe like the resources that you mentioned earlier, or even something different like hands-on work, volunteer work, stuff like that?
I mean, I think it's all of the above. I think, again, it's about representation in the books that they see. It's about the people that are around them. It's about, again, the peer-to-peer interaction. It's about conversations at the dinner table with parents. It's about who the parents interact with and what they do and how they speak, around their children. And they soak it all in. They see
Mhm.
it, and again, things can be more subtle that we don't even know that we do, as parents and role models for them. So I think sort of all of the above, and I think again, they are so curious. They want to know things, and they want to, we're not, you're not engaging in the same level of discussion an adult might have about religion, but understanding that different people believe different things. And for example, that's one thing we've had to do with my daughter. Or sort of after that, I spoke with my daughter because my husband's from India, and we raise our kids under a Hindu faith. And so she was also trying to process her friends saying, wait, there's one God, and our understanding of also worshiping other gods, and that, even her, and then her friend insisting that she's right and she's wrong, and then sort of talking to her about how there are many paths to God and how people believe different things, and they're like 5-year-olds, and so it at a very basic level, they can have these discussions and these explorations, and again, understanding of like, that there are many diverse experiences, perspectives, and all should be respected, is something I think parents really can expose kids to, and just kind of make a part of their everyday world so that it's natural and familiar, and becomes a part of their children's world.
Definitely. A common thread with what you've talked about with helping kids reduce hate and better their understanding is engaging and exposure, which I completely agree. Kids engaging, especially from like a young age, is really so important. I understand that you do a lot of pro bono work, lots of giving back to the community. Are there any ways that kids can engage, kids, young, old, high school, college, can engage that can give back to their community?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, as a parent, it's always been a little bit hard because some of the more formal volunteer experiences require a certain age and require things. So, from again, a very formal volunteer experience that can be limited by the requirements that different organizations do place, and for good reason, those exist. So, I think at the smaller levels, again, things as simple as being exposed to, even some of the things that happen around the holidays of like, giving back to communities, or here's how we're going to help others. And those ways can be helpful. And I think also just talking to kids and exposing them again when they're younger, and then as they become older and a little bit more responsible and are able to do it, there are lots of ways to get involved. I think reaching out to any of the issue organizations that parents might feel like their kids could get a lot out of is really good. Again, I mentioned Jewish Family Services. They just have a tremendous and very institutionalized volunteer program, and there's so many social justice issues that they work on, that it can be easier to get involved. But I do recognize for parents that it's limited in that way. You can't just kind of show up with like a 5-year-old,
Yeah.
to a migrant shelter. So,
Mhm.
there's lots of logistical and other reasons for that. But I think talking to them about these experiences, and getting them involved in different ways, even if it's something they're supporting you to do, or helping you do something at home that's getting you ready for it when they're smaller. And hopefully, as people become older and reach the age, they can get involved in these organizations as well.
Definitely. All of these resources were so helpful. And this entire conversation as a whole was, especially with the parts about refugees, which I know you're basically an expert in at this point, was so eye opening for me. Thank you so much for being here today, especially while you're on vacation.
Of course, you're welcome. It was a pleasure to speak with you.
It was a pleasure to speak with you too. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.